Leela had always believed in love the way others believed in the sun rising. She had poured her heart, her time, and every ounce of energy into her marriage with Daniel. For 8 years, she had been the quiet backbone of their life together, smoothing his failures, celebrating his successes, and holding the family together with invisible threads of patience and sacrifice. She had given up job promotions, delayed personal ambitions, and even moved cities to follow Daniel's career. And she had done it all willingly because she loved him, or at least she thought she did. The day everything changed began like any other. Leela prepared breakfast, humming softly, unaware that Daniel's world had just shifted. He had received news that his estranged uncle had passed away, leaving him $33 million, an amount that could have been a dream come true. But instead of sharing it, he chose cruelty. "I can't do this anymore," Daniel said, his voice colder than the November wind that seeped through the windows. Leela paused mid-step, the spatula hovering above the pan. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. She thought maybe he had a bad day, maybe it was stress, but the expression on his face told her this was something darker. "I mean you," he said, eyes hard, lips curling in a bitter smile. "You've been useless, a burden. I've built something here, and I don't need you dragging me down anymore." The words struck her like a physical blow. Leela's chest tightened, and she felt her stomach drop to the floor. She wanted to laugh to convince herself it was a cruel joke, but the seriousness in his eyes silenced her. "You're throwing me out," she whispered, barely audible, the words trembling like fragile glass. "Yes," Daniel said simply, as if the decision required no justification. "Pack your things, you're done here." Her world shattered in an instant. 8 years of love, loyalty, and devotion crumbled like dry leaves in a storm. The home she had once thought of as their sanctuary suddenly felt foreign, cold, and unwelcoming. Memories of shared laughter, quiet nights, and whispered dreams now felt poisoned, tainted by his betrayal. Leela didn't argue. She didn't beg. She had loved a man who no longer existed, and that realization hit harder than any slap. She grabbed a single suitcase, her hands trembling, and walked out the door. The street outside was eerily quiet, the autumn leaves swirling in the wind like tiny reminders of life's fragility. Leela had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, and the weight of rejection pressed down on her like a leaden cloak. As she sat on the curb, hugging her knees to her chest, tears ran freely. She felt every emotion at once: shock, sorrow, disbelief, and a simmering, undeniable anger. How could someone she had loved so completely discard her so easily? How could the man she had stood by through failures and heartbreaks now deem her useless? Leela realized through the haze of pain and tears that this was a turning point. Her world had ended, yes, but perhaps this was also the moment it could begin anew. A tiny spark of resolve flickered in her chest, fragile but persistent. If Daniel believed he could destroy her, he was gravely mistaken. Somewhere inside her, beneath the layers of hurt and betrayal, a quiet promise formed. She would rise, and when she did, he would see what useless really meant. Leela spent the first night alone in a cheap motel, the kind with flickering neon signs and peeling wallpaper. She lay on the stiff, narrow bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the hum of traffic outside. Every creak and distant siren seemed to echo Daniel's cruel words, "Useless burden done here." The repetition in her mind was relentless, like a song stuck in an unbearable loop. Her chest ached, and her tears had long dried into a bitter salt crust on her cheeks, but the pain refused to fade. She thought about the life she had poured into their marriage, the nights she stayed up worrying about Daniel's finances, the weekends she spent organizing his business documents, the career opportunities she had sacrificed for his ambitions. She had been invisible not by choice, but by the circumstances of love and trust. And yet, in a single moment, all of it had been dismissed as meaningless. As dawn crept through the dusty curtains, Leela felt anger begin to burn beneath the sorrow. It started as a faint flicker in her chest, growing hotter and brighter with every memory of Daniel's callousness. She realized that she had been underestimated, reduced to a label that didn't even come close to defining her. And the thought of that injustice made her blood boil. By mid-morning, she had made a decision. She would not beg for scraps or crawl back to a man who had thrown her out like garbage. She would not let him believe he had the power to erase her. Instead, she reached for her phone and called Claire, her lawyer and a trusted friend. Claire had always been pragmatic, sharp, and unwavering, the kind of woman who saw possibilities where others saw despair. "I need your help," Leela said when Claire answered, her voice trembling but firm. "Daniel, he's thrown me out. He inherited $33 million yesterday, and now he wants me gone." Claire's tone was calm, almost soothing, but her words carried steel. "Don't worry, Leela. We're going to make sure he regrets this. You're not just a spouse, you're a partner, a contributor, and you have rights. We'll protect you." For the first time since that terrible morning, Leela felt a small measure of hope. She recounted every detail, their years together, the sacrifices she had made, the role she had played in supporting his career, the shared assets, the emotional labor that no one had acknowledged. Claire listened, asking sharp, precise questions, noting every legal and moral leverage point. By afternoon, a plan was in motion. Documents were being prepared, legal avenues explored, and Leela realized that her sense of helplessness was transforming into power. She wasn't just a victim, she was a force in motion. She could feel it, the tide of possibility shifting beneath her feet. That evening, Leela allowed herself a quiet moment to reflect. The motel room still felt cold and alien, but she no longer felt entirely defeated. The darkness had not left her. It probably never would, but she had learned to carry it like armor. And within that darkness, a seed had been planted. The promise that Daniel's cruelty would not go unanswered. As she drifted into a fitful sleep, Leela's mind was no longer filled solely with heartbreak. It was buzzing with strategy, with determination, and with the faint, thrilling taste of sweet revenge. She knew it wouldn't be instantaneous, but when the time came, it would be precise, clever, and devastating. For the first time in hours, Leela allowed herself to smile, a small curve of satisfaction, knowing that she was no longer helpless. She was planning her rise. By the following morning, Leela felt a sense of clarity she hadn't known in days. The despair that had weighed on her like a storm cloud the night before was replaced by a burning focus. She was no longer just the woman Daniel had dismissed. She was a force to be reckoned with. Claire, her lawyer, had already prepared the necessary legal documents, and the plan was as meticulous as it was ruthless. Not out of hatred, but out of justice and the satisfaction of reclaiming what had been denied to her. Leela's hands trembled slightly as she signed the papers, her heart racing. Claire had outlined a claim to a substantial portion of the $33 million inheritance, based not only on the legalities of marriage but also on Leela's emotional labor, sacrifices, and contributions to the life Daniel now sought to erase. Each signature felt like a small act of triumph, a wordless declaration. "I am not useless." Daniel, meanwhile, had begun the day in his usual self-assured arrogance. He assumed Leela's absence was temporary, a minor inconvenience. But within hours, he received the first wave of shock, a formal legal notice, delivered with a precision that left no room for negotiation. He stared at the documents, disbelief crossing his face. Every word seemed to mock him, detailing the years of support and sacrifice he had so casually dismissed. This can't be," Daniel muttered, pacing his office. The words he had hurled at Leela the day before now felt hollow even to him. Pride twisted his stomach as he realized he had misjudged her entirely. He had thought her powerless, dependent, incapable. Now, within 24 hours, she had mobilized a strategy that made him vulnerable. Meanwhile, Leela watched the unfolding storm from a distance, her pulse steady, her mind clear. She didn't seek humiliation or vengeance for the sake of cruelty. Her triumph lay in reclaiming her dignity, proving to herself, and to Daniel, that she had worth beyond his narrow perception. Every media outlet that caught wind of the story painted Daniel in an unflattering light. The wealthy man who discarded the woman who built his life alongside him. Leela allowed herself a quiet smile each time she saw his public image wobble, not with malice, but with satisfaction in the truth finally emerging. Claire called mid-afternoon, her tone sharp with barely concealed amusement. "He's panicking," she said. "He thought this would be easy. He has no idea how much you contributed to his life. He underestimated you, Leela, and now he's paying the price." For the first time in days, Leela felt a profound sense of empowerment. She realized that revenge, sweet as it was, wasn't about breaking Daniel. It was about building herself. Each step of this legal maneuver, each carefully considered action, was not only restoring what she had lost, but also affirming her own strength. By evening, the initial shock had settled over Daniel like a heavy fog. He understood, painfully, that he had misjudged the woman he had once loved. But Leela, for her part, was already moving forward. The legal battle had begun, yes, but more importantly, she had begun reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her future. And in that quiet triumph, Leela realized that her sweetest revenge was not humiliation. It was transformation. Weeks passed, and with every passing day, Leela felt herself growing stronger. The legal battle had been intense, filled with tense negotiations, strategic filings, and the occasional flare of Daniel's arrogance. But with Claire's guidance, Leela had navigated it all with grace and precision. The inheritance, once a symbol of Daniel's power and cruelty, had become her instrument of liberation. Every dollar she secured felt like a small victory, a reminder that her worth had never been measured by anyone else's opinion. But more than money, Leela had reclaimed something far more valuable, her dignity. She had spent years bending herself to fit Daniel's world, shrinking into the shadows while he thrived. Now she stood unapologetically in the light, proud of the woman she had become. She realized that her true victory wasn't in the legal win, it was in the transformation of her own heart. With the settlement finalized, Leela took the first steps toward building a new life. She invested in a small but ambitious business that she had always dreamed of launching, a consultancy dedicated to helping women regain independence after betrayal or abuse. Each meeting, each strategy session, felt invigorating. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very man who had called her useless had inadvertently provided the means for her to finally realize her potential. Daniel, on the other hand, was beginning to feel the consequences of his actions. The media coverage had turned him into a cautionary tale. A wealthy, arrogant man who had discarded the person who had supported him unconditionally. Social circles whispered, colleagues raised eyebrows, and business partners began to question his judgment. Leela never gloated, never reached out to humiliate him. She let the results speak for themselves. Seeing him confronted with the reality of his own arrogance was a satisfaction far sweeter than vengeance. Even as she rebuilt her life, Leela allowed herself to feel joy again. She laughed freely, something she hadn't done in years without the weight of Daniel's criticism pressing on her shoulders. She reconnected with old friends, traveled to places she had always dreamed of visiting, and, most importantly, learned to trust herself and her instincts again. One evening, as Leela sat in her sunlit office, reviewing plans for an expansion of her consultancy, she reflected on how far she had come. The woman who had once sat on a motel bed, broken and abandoned, was now a beacon of strength and resilience. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy her had instead forged her into someone unstoppable. Daniel, meanwhile, remained a distant memory, a shadow of the life she had left behind. And though he had underestimated her, he had unwittingly contributed to her greatest triumph, the realization that she didn't need anyone to validate her worth. She had it all within herself. Leela's rise from the ashes was complete. Her revenge had not been rooted in anger but in transformation, in reclaiming the life and self-respect that Daniel had tried to erase. And as she looked out over the city skyline from her office window, she smiled not with bitterness, but with quiet, unshakable confidence. She was no longer a victim of circumstance or cruelty. She was a woman who had been tested, betrayed, and discarded, and who had emerged dazzling and unstoppable, stronger than she had ever imagined.